Quick story before we get into this. There's a specific move in poker where a player who's about to lose big suddenly goes calm. Not folds, not bluffs harder, just goes quiet, stacks their chips neatly, and lets everyone else at the table assume the hand is over. It isn't over. They've just stopped playing the hand you think they're playing. I mention this because on Saturday night, Donald Trump announced he was canceling what he himself described as the largest planned American military operation since World War II. Bigger than anything in Iraq, bigger than anything in Afghanistan. Gone, called off, subject to what he called the perimeters of a deal. And within about 24 hours, while half of Washington was still patting itself on the back for averting catastrophe, Iran did something considerably more interesting than sign a deal with the United States. It went to Oman instead, quietly, without a press conference. And that, not the canceled strike, is the actual headline here, because it tells you who's negotiating from strength and who's negotiating from relief. Let's set the scene properly, because the official version of this story is doing a lot of work to make Trump look like the dealmaker he insists he is. The plan, according to multiple officials, was to hit Iranian energy infrastructure directly, not the usual symbolic strikes on empty desert facilities, but the real thing, the stuff that actually generates revenue and keeps the lights on. This was scheduled for the weekend. Then, on Saturday, Trump posted that Iran and other Middle Eastern countries had asked him to hold off, because the outline of an agreement was apparently in place. Full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and what he called an end to Iran's nuclear threat. Big claims, very tidy, very made-for-truth social. And here's the part that should make you pause. It wasn't Iran that talked him down. It was Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, three governments that have absolutely nothing to gain from a wider war on their doorstep, and everything to lose if Iranian missiles start finding their oil terminals instead of American ones. Trump didn't get talked into peace. He got talked out of a strike by the neighbors, which is a very different thing, and a much less flattering one for a man who was 24 hours earlier promising to hit Iran very hard. Now here's where it gets genuinely revealing, and it's the bit almost nobody is covering properly. While the American press was busy writing de-escalation headlines, Iran's foreign ministry quietly confirmed it was working with Oman, not Washington, to establish a temporary safe corridor through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state media, when asked directly, gave no indication that Tehran had actually requested the U.S. call off its strikes. Read that twice. The White House's version is that Iran begged for mercy. Iran's version, delivered through the most understated channel available to a government that rarely does understated, is, we're not currently in negotiations with the United States about that. Two governments describing the same weekend in almost opposite terms, and only one of them has a reason to inflate what happened. Of course, this is where you'd expect the administration to clarify things. It has not. What you get instead is Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling the country that Iran is facing a different kind of president now, while a retired CENTCOM commander describes Tehran as entering its last gasp. Confident language. The kind of language that tends to show up right before events make it look premature. Because if Iran really were on its last gasp, it wouldn't have the leverage to route around the United States entirely and cut a separate arrangement with a third country for the one thing Washington actually wants, an open Strait of Hormuz. You don't do that from a position of collapse. You do that from a position of, frankly, not needing the deal you're being offered nearly as badly as the other side needs to announce one. And this is where we have to talk about what this actually costs the United States, because that's the part that gets lost in all the will there be a ceasefire coverage. Every time Washington announces an imminent deal and then has to walk it back, and this administration has done this more than once this year, it spends a little more of something that doesn't come back easily, which is the assumption that when the United States says a deal is closed, it's closed. Gulf allies watched Trump get pulled back from a strike by their own diplomatic pressure, not by any American strategic recalibration. That's a lesson learned in real time by Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. American military action in this region is now something they can manage upward, not something Washington controls independently. That is an extraordinary shift in leverage, and it happened quietly over a weekend, while everyone was relieved that bombs weren't falling. There's also the blockade to think about. Because it's still running underneath all of this. U.S. Central Command has been redirecting commercial vessels and disabling ships as part of an active naval blockade on Iranian ports. Over 30 vessels rerouted, several disabled, while Trump simultaneously frames the situation as nearly resolved. So, which is it? Is this an active military containment operation, or is it a deal about to be signed? The honest answer, as far as anyone outside a small circle in Washington actually knows, is both badly stitched together. And the stitching is being done live in Truth Social posts rather than through anything resembling an actual negotiating framework. That should concern Americans specifically, not because of what it means for Iran, but because of what it means for how their own government is currently running foreign policy. By improvisation, announced retroactively, with allies finding out the parameters at the same time the public does. And this is the part that never quite makes it into the primetime segments. Every time this administration oversells a diplomatic win that turns out to be provisional or worse, contested by the other party involved, it erodes something specific and valuable: the credibility of the next American threat. Deterrence only works if the other side believes you'll follow through. Iran now has direct, recent, easily replicable evidence that a sufficiently coordinated push from 3 Gulf states can pull Washington back from the largest strike it had planned in decades. That's not a one-time data point. That's a playbook, and it's now sitting in Tehran's files for the next time this happens, which, given everything else going on regionally, is probably not going to be very long from now. So, where does this actually leave the United States strategically once you strip away the press releases? Talks are apparently set to begin this afternoon, focused on Hormuz and on what Trump is calling denuclearization, though Iran has been notably quiet about confirming either the timeline or the terms. Which means, as I record this, we are in a position where the American public has been told a deal is essentially done. The Iranian public has been told nothing of the kind, and the actual diplomatic movement of consequence. Iran and Oman working out a Hormuz corridor without American involvement is happening entirely outside the frame Washington is presenting. If that arrangement holds, Iran gets to demonstrate it can guarantee regional shipping stability without needing an American security blessing to do it. If it doesn't hold, Trump gets to relaunch the strike he just very publicly, very dramatically called off, at which point the biggest attack since World War II framing starts to look less like restraint and more like a threat that expired the moment nobody called the bluff. Either way, the actual equation shifting in the Middle East this week isn't the one being described in the headlines about averted war. It's the quieter one, where the smaller Gulf states just demonstrated they can steer American military decisions in real time, and Iran just demonstrated it doesn't need Washington's permission to solve its own shipping problem. Trump wanted this to read as the moment he forced Iran to the table. What it may actually turn out to be is the moment everyone at that table quietly noticed he wasn't holding the cards he thought he was. I'm Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines. We'll see how much of this deal is still standing by the time I'm back here to talk about it.